You can see them? Okay, so to clarify if you're in the right place?
Do we need this?
Probably not.
Because if not, let's turn it off and then we can actually properly record.
Do you turn it off and on again?
It's going to take a while to cool off before it even shuts down. Or not. I was just kidding. It just shuts down.
Okay, so this is the room for recruiting, and you're in the right place if you want to know how to get a good job or how to hire good people. So we'll quickly do some intros, and then I have a few questions to start with, but mostly we wanted to answer your burning questions. Between the three of these, they have interviewed thousands of candidates, and they know what they like, what they don't like, what can help your chances and what can hurt your chances. And at least from some of our preparation discussions, some of the things that people think are best practices are some of the worst things you could possibly do. So we want you to take away at least one or two things that you didn't know before on maybe how to enhance your chances to be noticed, how to communicate your brand, your value proposition, and things that may be changing in the workforce. And there's some flashy lights as well, so blinky lights. All right, so do a quick round of intros. We also might be getting chairs at some point during this discussion. Sure, true. So I'm Josh Corman. I'm one of the board of advisors for the Source Conference, and we'll just go starting with Jen. Jen.
Okay, hello. Can you guys hear me? Yes, there we go. I'm Jen Ellis. I'm the head of communications at Rapid7. So I'm not a recruitment expert, but I am going to talk to you a little bit about building a personal brand.
And I'm Mark Cucinelli. I'm a senior talent advisor at TJX, working on the global talent acquisition team with a focus in IT.
I'm Mark Knowlton. I'm with Akamai. I'm focused on product development group, and I've been in the space about 18 years.
Okay, so I have a few seed questions. So what I'm going to start with is talent first. So I'm going to start with Jen. Jen's a PR professional, and one of the things she's done for us in other venues is talk about what's your brand, what's your core value proposition, how do you best represent yourself in a modern job economy. So for her perspective, it's going to be a little bit of professional development on making yourself more attractive and more differentiated. Then we'll go to how they spot volumes of resumes and triage and filter those. So what are the three most important things to know for differentiating yourself as you seek a new job?
Okay, so I think that the answer is probably unbelievably obvious. Like, I think the first is, like, you need to know who you are, kind of, to thine own self be true. So, like, be authentic. That's pretty important. I think you need to know what you want to be, in terms of, do you want to be public facing? Do you want to build a brand for yourself? Like, there's no need to. It's entirely in your hands, but there's lots of opportunity to. There is infinite opportunity right now for security professionals to step up and take a role in helping to educate the broader community. And people who want to get involved in that, like, that's awesome, do it. So if that's something you're interested in, there are lots and lots of ways to do it. And there are lots of platforms and avenues you can do it through, like Twitter, for example, but there are other ways. I'm sure lots of you blog. So I think, like, be really clear on who you are, and then be really clear on, like, where your lines are and your limitations on what you do and don't want to be. Don't try and be something that isn't real, isn't you.
Okay. We're going to touch on a couple topics, one of them being how social media is changing the recruiting process, so there's a few factoids there. We're also going to talk about negotiating salary and what is realistic versus not realistic, what you're looking for when you're looking at resumes and whatnot. So let me pivot off some of that. She mentioned Twitter. Do you look, or do the hiring managers factor in things like LinkedIn profiles, Facebook, Twitter, or is that a bridge too far? How does that factor in? Can you shoot yourself in the foot with your public persona? You want to go first, Mark?
Sure. Yeah, there's what most people understand is the information that you put out there, everybody can see it. It's never going to disappear, so you have to be really careful. There are times, as doing background research, we'll take a look at a Twitter account or a LinkedIn page or occasionally Facebook. So one of the things with LinkedIn right now, you're noticing it's becoming you see more Facebook photos and more captions and things like that. And at the end of the day, you want to use a device like LinkedIn in a way to represent yourself in a professional side. It is professional networking, and the cute pictures with you in a bear hat somewhere, and you're posting that. That's the first thing that people look at. It's going to have a direct reflection on how people view you. You only get one chance to make a first impression. So when you're viewing that, especially on LinkedIn, you want to make sure that you represent yourself well. And from an IT security side, you obviously don't want to put too much information out there, but enough that it'll generate, which I'm sure that you're all getting plenty of emails about opportunities, about positions that you're good at or not good at. So.
Can I just respond to that
Sure.
thing you said? So one thing that you touched on there is your IT security professionals. So I think knowing what you're comfortable with in terms of letting people see your profile. If you have a Facebook page that's open to the universe, fair enough, you might be that person and you're really comfortable with that. But if you're putting a load of stuff on there that you wouldn't want a potential employer to look at, they're going to be looking at it and thinking, but you're a security person. Why isn't this really tightly stitched up so I can't see it? So just make that decision and make it an active decision, like a choice. And if you are leaving it open, then don't expose yourselves.
All right, is there already a question? We're going to keep this fairly vibrant and interactive. We'll also repeat questions.
So what about the new trend of having potential employers mandating that you give over access if you cut that off? Do you mind repeating the question just before?
So what about the new trend that certain employers are mandating that you merge your personal social identity with the work identity? Is that?
And present that to them before hiring.
Yeah, I think there's two different questions there. So one is merging and one is giving them access to your profile.
What do you think?
Well, I think there'd be a lot of resistance from individuals who are being asked to, volunteer personal stuff that they don't regard as part of their CV, part of their professional profile. So that'd be an interesting debate. I mean, if some companies mandate it, that's one thing. I can't see us doing something like that, but I'm sure that there'll be some companies that paint themselves okay, don't go there because they're going to make you divulge stuff that you think is personal and private.
Personal opinion, I probably wouldn't take that job, but
Me either.
yeah, okay.
Tell that guy to stop talking so loud.
Sorry, just on the other bit, did you want to tackle the combining the two? So I am actually one of those evil people that will say to people hey, you have an active social media presence and I'm watching. So I apologize. But the reality is that your organization manages the way that it presents itself. And I think this falls into two different buckets. There's the bucket where you're working for a security company, and therefore if you have a presence in the security community, it is completely aligned with what the company itself does. And so that means that the emphasis on how you're seen in your community, it's the community that your company operates in. So at that point, there's going to be a much, much stronger emphasis on how you do and don't operate. I would say find out what the social media guidelines are for the company, make sure that you're within them. Most companies have reasonable social media guidelines, sweeping generalization, but most people they try and focus on stuff that's actually to protect you. And it's designed to be just kind of, don't make yourself look like an idiot kind of stuff. And don't start fights and that kind of thing, don't be aggressive. But I think that this comes down to your own authenticity. You need to be comfortable with where your line is. So we have lots of people at Rapid7 who are very active in social media and they feel like they have their own individual brand. And so it's a challenge for them to manage that and still represent the company. And the way that I basically say it is there are two basic things you can do to protect yourself from that. One is the old chestnut of my views don't represent those of my company. And the second is just don't talk about your company. If you want to talk about beer drinking in the office or whatever it is, just don't mention the company name. Just leave the company well out of it. But if you decide that you're going to put Rapid7 in your handle, then recognize that you have made an active choice to represent the company, and therefore the way that you communicate is going to be tied to that. And again, like if you work for a security company and you are trying to build your profile in the security community, those things overlap. What you do impacts the reputation of the business. If you work for a different kind of company, the line will probably be a little bit less solid for the communications people that are looking at this stuff. They'll probably take the view that you're not going to impact the company's business unless you do something really outrageous, like the Vodafone guy who got really, really homophobic on Twitter on the Vodafone handle. So as long as you are not like doing stuff that's just really going to put you in dangerous territory and would anyway from a legal point of view, you'll probably be fine. Sorry, long answer.
And I'm going to move away from social media in a bit here, but one thing I realized is looking across, you guys do recruitment in both your companies for more than just security jobs. Mm-hmm. So do you nuance when you're looking for a security professional, or do you look at everyone as equal?
Well, depending on the role, at Akamai, we look for security professionals in a lot of different mediums because there are different industries that look at problems in an entirely different way. As a matter of fact, I had lunch with somebody who was a biomedical PhD who is now a program manager in InfoSec because, you know, and we have like astrophysicists and in other sciences that approach problems in a radically different way. So from my perspective, when I look for security folks, I look like, okay, who is a professional who looks at problems completely differently than someone who had the conventional CS, you know, background with data structures and operating system, databases, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But people who are actively engaged in solving really complex, open-ended types of issues. Because when I recruit, I typically look at what deliverables does this person produce. It's not about buzzwords and certs.
Anything to add to that?
Typically, when I review resumes or look for people online or whatever the case might be, I'm trying to find someone who they don't necessarily have to be a fit for one particular role, but might be a good fit for the entire team. And so I'll share that resume with a number of managers. I think it comes a lot from my agency background of sharing as much information as you possibly can to not only help the individual, but to help the team as well, because they might be working on something that I'm not privy to, or they have a new project coming up. They say, oh, well, we need somebody with that skill set. We just haven't put it out there yet. So it lets people know, it lets the team know who we're pipelining for candidate flow, and also gives that candidate an opportunity to have more of a presence within our team, whether it's in networking or IT security or whatever the case might be.
Actually, if I could dovetail up that, one of the things I see when people write resumes is, number one, it's not a very fun activity, and you don't like to do it a lot because it means you're about to look for a job. But when you look at the content, imagine a non-technical person reading this, and can they make sense of it by just giving it one read? Does it have a very clear narrative description of deliverables, work artifacts you're actually producing? Because it's easy to get caught up in trying to shout a lot of buzzwords. I know a lot of recruiters typically do keyword searches on buzzwords, and of course they're going to be in there if it represents things that you've worked on, different environments or tools, etc. But the substance of the resume, focus on having a very precise description in narrative form of deliverables you produce, so someone can take that and make English language sense of it and be able to understand what it means, so they could overlay it to the jobs. Like, okay, this engineer is going to be producing this kind of work. Is this what I'm reading here? Mm-hmm. And it's not based on their understanding of technical detail and protocols and that sort of thing.
Okay. You know, a nagging question I've always had, and I think this is true for many of you, I personally am horrible at maintaining my LinkedIn, and I'm only slightly less horrible at maintaining a CV or a resume. Is it more important to have a solid resume or a solid LinkedIn profile, or does it matter?
Resume.
Do both?
Resume, no question.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at a resume, when I look at a resume, sorry. When I look at a resume, I'm looking for a story. I'm looking for aesthetics in a story, and to find out where you started and where you've headed in your career. So if you can think about that as a narrative and saying, well, I started out as a junior analyst here and just moved my way up. At that point, but you also have to make sure that everything's spelled out correctly and that it looks aesthetically pleasing, because it's not easy to write resumes, but if you can take a look at it, if somebody looks at it and goes, you know, they took a lot of time, a lot of effort into producing this, it might give you a better shot of really moving ahead and getting that information across. Yeah.
Have a question on that?
Yep.
It doesn't happen very often, but usually employers will state a preference for a resume, but they never tell people that when they're submitting on the website.
Oh.
So it would be awesome if a particular company had a style or a template for somebody to fill in that wasn't the let's fill in a web form, which I know I hate to the nth degree. Something that was an example. So in other words, you're stating a preference, but there's no way for an applicant to know what your preference is.
So I've literally had this conversation with hiring managers, and I went around a room one time and said, okay, somebody said this resume was too long, this one was too long, so I stopped everything and I said, how many pages do you think a resume should be? One person goes, 4 pages. Okay. Another one said 3 pages. Another one says 2. At the end of by the time we got around the entire table, nobody had any idea. There's no set, number of pages that your resume can be. I've been recruiting for 10 years. My resume is 4 pages long. It's probably a little long, but it tells a story all the way back for as long as I can. So I actually, nice. So as long as it's not a 7+ page resume, but you're able to tell the story, it doesn't just have to be 1 page. Because as you grow as a professional, you're going to get a chance where maybe you're 10 or 15 years, 20 years into it. If you can fit all your information that you've done in IT on 1 page, congratulations. The font's going to be about 7, and nobody's going to be able to read it, and you're really not getting your background and your story across to what you've done and where you'd like to head next. So there's a couple of different ways to explain it, but it's just make it aesthetically pleasing. Have somebody else look at it and say, is this something that you would like to read? And if they're not going to read it, then work on it again and try to get a better format to it.
Can I just add one thing on LinkedIn versus resume?
Sure.
And this is actually kind of a question for you guys. So do you do a lot of, do you mostly kind of go out and like proactively look for people, or do you kind of get resumes in?
No, I'll go and review people's LinkedIn pages.
Right. So that was my point, is that in that instance, your LinkedIn page being up to date and being optimized is super valuable. And like in our case at Rapid7, we pretty much all of the recruitment we do is we go out and find people, and we do it pretty much all through LinkedIn. So it is really valuable to get your LinkedIn page looking great, and obviously the resume piece as well.
For me, my LinkedIn page is also my resume in most cases. I don't expect anybody in IT security to put all the technologies that they've ever worked with, because you're not supposed to. But at least give us an idea to reach out to you, and hopefully that the emails that you're getting aren't so canned and wrong for the position that you get because somebody pings you on. So.
Actually,
He got it too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure.
The activity of sort of editing and fine-tuning, targeting your current resume at a particular role, at the role you're looking at now. So should your resume be flexible enough to be able to do that, emphasize that for this role, these skills, this is what I bring to this role?
Yeah, it's actually on our list. So the belief of you have one and only one resume, or do you tailor it per job you're seeking? So just to repeat it for the camera. So responses? I thought I just did.
So Josh was talking about whether you should just have a one-size-fits-all resume or one that you should customize. In fact, Josh and I had part of this conversation this morning. A lot of times people write an objective at the top of the resume, and I think that is an absolutely fatal mistake unless you're sending each resume completely custom to a company. And I'll tell you why. So you could have a very clear, concise narrative of what your objective is. But if you're writing it sort of generically for, to any and all companies, a manager could see just one word in there. Let's say your goal is to get to a management position down the road, and you express it in a way that you say manager, management in some context. Hiring manager sees that and you're out. He says, I'm looking for an individual contributor, not a manager next. So it's very dangerous to have a generic objective section that you're sending out to multiple companies unless that objective happens to absolutely dovetail with what that one manager for that one position is looking for. It takes longer to customize it per position, but if you're not doing it that way, if you're just sending one to many, having an objective section is going to exponentially decrease your chances of making the positive impression. So,
yeah, so for those that already are not maintaining a good LinkedIn profile, which would probably be the one that's one to many, you should expect it should be as generic and factual as possible. It's even more onerous to say that you should have plural versions of a resume or a CV, which I'm going to get to in a second. But Jen and I have been doing some work on the Hill, me through the Cavalry, her through some other things, and one of the things I've come across is the kind of things you can put on a CV for people outside of the echo chamber or outside of industry is very, very different than the kind of acronyms and jargon. And like someone on the Hill doesn't care that we spoke in at Black Hat or DEF CON. They don't even know what those things are. But we might make them as a very prominent feature in our echo chamber. So the idea of having plural manifestations, like this is my one for doing something with academia, this is my one for doing something with public policy, depending on the role you're at or how you want to present yourself, I basically have to gut mine and redo one entirely for bona fides for why someone in public policy should bother listening to me. And the very things I would put on that would be made fun of at a DEF CON type conference, right? So, and inherent in that question, so take either half you want, is what the hell is the difference between a CV and a resume?
Depends which country you're in.
from my perspective, they're analogous.
Okay.
It's just a colloquial term.
What does CV stand for? Curriculum
vitae.
Vitae?
One thing I was just going to say really quickly, and I think this might make me sound like I'm 87 years old, but I've been recruiting recently, and I keep getting these resumes through, and I look at them, and I just feel like there's no context when I look at them. And it's the first time I've ever gone, I really wish I had a covering letter, which is so bizarre because in the past when I've tried to write a covering letter, I thought it was the most pointless, trite exercise, and I really hate doing it. But now I'm seeing that actually having the context of somebody telling you why they're interested in the job is really valuable as a hiring manager. Do you guys feel like the covering letter is dead?
I don't really, it's not too often that I'll read a cover letter. In fact, the objectives, even the objective piece, for me, in my world, you don't have to spend a whole ton of time on that. I would recommend tweaking your resume to the job. If it's an individual contributor role and you were a manager most recently, then yeah, in the objective, you're open to working in an individual contributor role, and here's why. But realistically, if the resume that you're sending doesn't look like it's even close to the position, why are we going to call you? I mean, it's great to network. I mean, that's all fine and good, but we also have SLAs to meet, and we want to make sure that we get you in front of the right people, in front of the managers, so that we look as though we're doing our job as well.
All right, I'm going to move to some negotiation stuff. Actually, you have one more?
Just going to ask a quick thing. It sounds like the process you go through with each resume is very time intensive. For some positions, I can imagine you might get hundreds, maybe even thousands of resumes. How do you quickly filter through those so that you can take that time that you described?
All right, I'm going to repeat it for the camera.
Okay.
If you get thousands or hundreds or thousands of resumes, what's your filtration process to narrow it down?
I would love 100,000 resumes. I really would. Yeah. No, absolutely. The managers typically go by the 10-second rule. They don't see what they like within the first 10 seconds of reviewing the first page. If your technologies aren't on the front page that you've worked with, if they're not specific to the job that you're applying to, then if I send that resume over, that manager might not want to look at it. But if there's an opportunity where you don't have everything that they're looking for and you're close, I'm going to call you, and I'm going to see why, necessarily not on paper, that you're going to be the right fit. So it varies. I mean, I've had to fill a POS point of sale position before, and I've had someone apply that worked at Tennessee Barbecue on a cashier, and it was a business analyst position. I'm like, you punch numbers into a keyboard. That's not the POS system we want you to use. So people will apply. That was a 5-second rule, I think, on that one, though.
All right, one of the things we had kind of hinted at is negotiation. How do you get the right salary, whatnot? And I want to just right away say we have two very large companies and also a non-HR recruiting person at a smaller one. But I've heard all sorts of conflicting information, like people always lowball you by 10% so you can counteroffer by 10%. I've heard that's completely false. I've heard it's completely true. Maybe you can't get more salary, but you can get more equity. So we're going to maybe talk about what your mindset should be when you're doing it, and just differentiate if you're a large entrenched company or a startup with more flexibility.
Sure. So having spent more time at larger companies, the way companies do compensation is they subscribe to what are called salary surveys, where all the participating members self-report on what they pay different positions at what job levels. And there's a low, a median, and a high. And the high is usually like the 70th percentile of the actual ceiling that they can pay. What most companies do is they try to, when they make an offer, they will try to come as close to the midpoint as possible for a couple of reasons. Number one, they don't want to have an internal equity problem. An internal equity simply being, who do we have on the staff right now in these roles and what are we paying them? Plus, they also want to make sure that there's enough headroom. So if you get hired as a senior software engineer, and it's likely from your tenure that you're not likely to reach the point where you're going to be considered for, say, a principal for at least 3 years, we have to make certain that there's at least 3 years of headroom for you, because not getting a merit increase is going to be pretty, demotivating. So when people are making an offer, they're thinking about, okay, we have to make an offer that's within our guidelines, but it's not going to cause problems. Because the reality is people talk. They shouldn't be talking about salary stuff, but it happens. And earlier in my career, we had two different guys in the same team. One, we made this kind of a one-off deal because he used to be a consultant and was being well compensated. And another guy was a junior rock star who was growing into himself, got a big raise from where he was. He was doing cartwheels at the offer he got until he talked with his buddy. And that was very early in my career, and I didn't know any better, but it was a huge problem. So it's important that you realize that the company has some pretty strict guidelines, and they're not going to make you an offer necessarily based on what you're making now. A lot of times people think like, oh, when you make a move, you get an automatic 10% bump. They're going to make, hopefully, the best offer they can within the guidelines, but they're going to be sticking to try to stay to the midpoint to maintain internal equity and to give you enough headroom so you're going to get your merit increases.
Does that mean there's never any room for a counter?
No, there is, but they want to try to get you at the midpoint. If they have to, sometimes they'll close the gap with a sign-on bonus. But for the most part, they're going to stay within the guardrails, because unless you are more senior than the advertised job description and they have the ability to up-level it and make a business case, that's one instance where you could actually get a higher salary than the posted job position. But that's kind of an edge case.
And what's a respectable percentage counter if someone does, and what's just going to offend you and kill the deal?
So
It's anyone. Yeah.
I'm never offended.
Never.
I want to figure out. The hardest thing to talk about is salary. And I think part of it is being as a talent advisor or a recruiter is just being upfront and honest with the people that you're working with. I'll always ask, what are you currently making, and what are you looking for in the future? Or if this position works out, what's a number or a range that you're looking for? And the reason why I want to know is so that I can help you get the best offer possible while still maintaining the equity within the organization and the team. And in doing so, I think for me, it opens up a lot more opportunity to have that conversation and find out where the person's head is at. So I encourage the negotiation piece, but just In most cases, you're not going to, the deal's not going to go away if the offer you set, if you counter with a reasonably higher offer. But if you get offered something at 120 and you're like, no, I want 150, then we're going to have another talk. Like, well, that's a little out of our range, so we might want to reconsider that. And why do you think you're worth that much? I'm not saying you're not, but just, it is what it is. A lot of people don't negotiate because they're afraid that they'll lose the opportunity at that company. And in most cases, it's not the case. It's just a matter of being realistic and not going so far out from where the original offer was that it puts you in a place where we don't even want to work with this person.
And actually, to touch on that point, a lot of times when you're in the first conversation with the recruiter and they bring up salary, a lot of times the default assumption or position is like, oh, it's too early to talk about money. And I disagree with that from a couple of perspectives. Number one, let's say you're at a salary right now that makes this an absolute showstopper. I would rather get that out on the table now than have anyone else invest their time, including yours. I had a couple of months ago, I had a developer, he must have had the perfect storm set of skills at this one place, because when he told me where his base was now, it was probably $50,000 more than we would ever consider paying him for the kind of skills he had. And he said, well, I'm willing to be flexible. I said, no one's that flexible. So it's honestly. And so.
You should have said, I'm willing to be honest.
So
I'm actually making this.
Yeah, so the idea of it's too early to get in the salary is actually, I think, an outdated idea, because you want to make use of your time, and you'd rather find out sooner than later if there's going to be a huge delta, if compensation is going to be a problem.
I'm not saying I have the best advice at all, but it seems like although we're talking about salary right now, it seems like the more accurate and candid you are about your expectations, what you want to see and don't want to see, the better for everybody. Because it seems like when people do quit a job, it's that, well, I thought it was going to be this, but it ended up being this. And if you're too eager to match yourself or squish yourself into the job described at face value, then they're going to think they're getting something they're not. So I've been much more unapologetic about, this is what I'm looking for, these are the parts I like about the job, these are the parts I don't. And it's not to be diva-ish, it's to make sure that I think, what do they say, 90% of life is expectation management. So do you guys agree with that, or that you should be very transparent about what you like and don't like, or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But be nice about it. don't just tell us. And we should be asking that anyways. What are your future plans? What are your goals? And that should come up in the conversation anyways.
I think it's a two-way buying process. And so you're trying to sell yourself to a future employer, but they also should be trying to sell themselves to you a little bit. And you have to feel like you're on the same page and that this is actually going to be a good fit for you. And I think a part of that is, and I'm sorry, I know I said about being authentic at the beginning and I sound like a Hallmark ad, but I think it really does come back to that sort of piece around authenticity and knowing who you are and knowing what's important to you. For some people, remuneration is going to be the be-all and end-all. And fair enough. And for some people, having opportunities to develop and grow will be the be-all and end-all. For some people, feeling like you make a difference in the company and that you're contributing in a meaningful way is what it's all about. And you need to understand what that is to you, what motivates you, and then assign the appropriate value based on those things. And that's where you'll know where your boundaries are in a negotiation. Because if it's all about money to you, then you're going to be much less flexible on that piece. Whereas if having an opportunity to really contribute or to grow is what really drives you, you're probably going to be a little bit more comfortable having the price negotiation.
One thing off of that too is just when you're looking at not just the monetary side of things, you also want to take into consideration the hours that you're putting into it. One of the conversations that I have with people on a regular basis is, you can go work at XYZ company and XYZ company, and that's fine, and you'll make $120,000 a year, and that's great, but you're also going to be working 60 or 80 hours a week. So the time versus money is really, it switches. It's if you're making $100,000 a year and you're working 40 hours a week, it's about $50 an hour. once you get to that 60-hour time frame, it gets down to like $35 an hour, and you really only make it $70,000 a year if you look at it in that way. So, fine, you want an extra $20,000? Go ahead. You're never going to make it home for dinner necessarily, and if that's okay with you, then that's absolutely fine. But that monetary side of it, you can make $1 million a year, but if you can't, if you like to enjoy time with friends and family and everything else, then those are things you need to take into consideration as well.
We didn't have it in our outline here, but one of the things that came to my mind twice is I'll often have a lot of younger folks say, ask for mentoring or career advice, and while it relates to job function, this happened last week. Someone said, I don't have a CS background, but I want to get into cybersecurity. Yes, he said cybersecurity. Get over it.
Get over it.
One of the things I encouraged him to do, and I'd be curious your thoughts, is I encourage this notion of an informational interview. So well before I became an analyst of the 451 group, I went to Paul Stamp at 451, and I bought him lunch, spent an hour with him at his office afterwards, and I said, what's a day in the life of being an analyst? Because I'm thinking maybe at some point I might want to be an analyst, or how long should I do it, or what's the longest before you get rusty? And often people are figuring that out with a real interview and a real job they accept, and then they find out they don't like it. So what do you think the role is in the modern job market of networking, mentoring, informational interviews? Do people avail themselves enough of that?
So for strictly informational interview like you described, maybe not as likely, but I don't think anyone in this audience would be someone who's that junior person trying to figure out what I want to do for a career path. But to touch on your point about networking, I would emphatically encourage, if you're applying for a position, you could throw your resume to jobs and take your chances. You are so much better off. Go onto LinkedIn, find somebody who's at that company, see where they're connected to you, reach out to them, and get a referral. Okay, so introduction, because not only is that going to be a much warmer path into the company, most companies have employee referral programs. So you drop out of the sky and you're a good fit for one of their positions. That person is going to be motivated by like a $2,500 or $3,000 referral bonus, and so you can sort of sidestep the whole resume database and hope the recruiter picks your resume out of a pile of highly qualified candidates. But this way you're going to step up from the crowd. It's a no-brainer.
What are the percentages? I had heard in the past, 70% of jobs are word of mouth, not blind submissions. What's it right now? What?
Lots of referrals.
Okay.
45% of Akamai's hires are employee referrals.
45?
Every job I've ever had was through someone I knew, which might mean I'm not very good at my job.
I think the added advantage of that is you have more of a known quantity of what you're getting into because you have a few relationships there.
I wanted to touch, Marcus, when we were talking about resumes, because this just came up, and this is the kind of thing I'm sure that most of us have confronted, the idea of titles. I cannot stress strongly enough that you cannot get all wrapped up in a title for a couple of reasons. Number one, titles mean different things at different places, okay? Not long after I started at Akamai, guy came in, interviewed for a senior software engineer position, bright, capable guy. The feedback was, really smart guy, liked the stuff he did. He's not a senior, not yet anyway. He has the chops, but he is absolutely not a senior software engineer at Akamai, not a chance. Give him 12 months. He wound up withdrawing because his current employer promoted him to architect. So he's perfectly fine as an architect there, he just wasn't a senior here. Just within the last week and a half, we had a guy who's a senior software engineer at a large company whose name I won't mention, and he was absolutely insistent on a principal title. And it is so rare for us to hire a principal just based on the knowledge you have to have of our stuff, which you can't get if you're not there. But he insisted that the reason he wanted the principal title was because he didn't want it to be perceived that he took a step backward. But then I hit him with okay, so you've been in your current job for 9 years. You're not a job hopper. You tell us you're good enough to warrant the principal title, but are you telling me that you intend on leaving in less time than you could have actually earned the promotions? So by the time you're actually going to be in the job market again, especially as someone who's not a job jumper, you will have earned a principal anyways. The conversation, I mean, the argument is just absolutely empty now. But he made it that was his foxhole, and he wasn't going to change his mind. Absolutely foolish.
All right, I saw your hand first.
I'm curious about your opinion on job jumping.
Our opinion on job hopping.
So,
It is changing, isn't it?
oh, it definitely is. You know, 7, 8 years ago, if you didn't have a string of like 3+ years, successions of company, that was, you may as well paint yourself with plutonium. But these days, it's not uncommon to have people with 2 to 3 years experience, but depending on the company you're going for, like, and Akamai is a great example, you're going to be drinking from a fire hose for 12 months.
I can attest to that.
I consulted a company, Pegasystems, who has large, complex proprietary technology. You're going to be training for you. So if you're going to a place, it's, you know, until you've been there a year, you're not going to really make meaningful contributions. They're going to be very leery of someone who, you know, has a string of 18 months, 20 months, 14 months, etc. It's no longer the Scarlet A as it was almost a decade ago, but it absolutely gets noticed, no question.
Josh.
Wait, just to touch on the job hop piece, keep in mind too on your resume, if you happen to take a consulting gig where it's 6, 12, 18 months, please make that, note that contract, that it was a contract role and it wasn't a full-time position, because that will also have us view your experience in a different light, because a lot of times if you're consulting and getting to that next piece, you're coming, the company wants you to come in with your sneakers on ready to run as a consultant. There should be minimal ramp-up time at best. But if you're going into a full-time role, you don't want people to look at it and go, well, he's 6 months here and 6 months here and 6 months here. What are they doing? If we don't know it's contract, hopefully we'll call you and ask you and try to figure it out. But keep in mind too, the individuals that are looking at the resumes might not always be technically savvy, and it's okay to be very remedial with your information so that they can just see it, take it, and run with it.
All right, so technically we probably should be wrapping up, but I'll take that last question because you were patient.
Oh, thank you. My question was about actually your last comment about the person that wanted the principal title, why that's important, and they'll eventually earn it. I think for the candidate, the assumption there is pretty astounding, which is that you're going to bring me into a situation that I'm going to like, and that you're telling me everything up front. Well, I think we all know about jobs with HR or whoever never tells you everything up front, right? They don't tell you, like, okay, well, all right, we have a team over here. Well, this person's overperformed, this person's underperformed. You're going to be pulling this person's weight. This boss is difficult to deal with. So you don't know all these things. So you want that title because you may only last a year, which you just said is kind of okay now. So
maybe it's not the right position for you then, or it's not the right company. I mean, we can't share all that information. We'll get sued. We can't go around and say, well, this person sucks and this person's great over here. You can't do that.
there's diplomatic ways to do it.
What?
Yeah.
What's that? The question / comment was some amalgamation of, back to his point about you can't ask for a principal title when you haven't earned it yet there, and it was just a counterpoint of you're not going to know all the factors. It may be harder. You might need that title to know that you're on a square footing. There is a matter of going too far though, and that's why it's really important to interview your peers outside of your reporting structure as well. No one really brought that up, but some of my worst nightmares were nothing with my boss or my direct teammates. They were the people I depended upon in the organization. So that's part of your risk assessment, I would say.
It's also part of like going back to knowing what's valuable to you. Like if the title is something that really matters to you,
Don't compromise.
then you know then it's really important to you, and you should focus on that. But if it's not like as important, then try and understand the context. And I mean, like, you're all security people. I'm sure that you hear about how context is king all the time, and it's so important to understand the real situation that relates to your organization. So it's the same thing, right? You just need to know what the context is.
And the flip side is, same thing with salary. If you stretch them too far, it's going to plague you forever because you're like the most junior principal there, or why did they come in at that title, or you didn't quite live up to those expectations. So it's all part of a risk assessment, I think.
Smaller to mid-sized companies, you'll have a better opportunity to tweak your title, whereas the larger companies, at TJX for example, everybody's a security analyst. You're a security analyst 1 through 4, and then there's a manager. But if you come and work there, and then you decide after a couple of years or whatever it is that you decide you want to move on to a new position, or you're looking for a job outside of the company, you can change your title on your resume if you'd like. Don't get it so far out of whack that people aren't gonna, when they call you out on it, you're not gonna be able to answer the question. Well, it says here that you were a senior architect, but you're writing. But when we called and asked, they said that you were just you were working on databases. Like, what are you doing? Like, why does it work like that? But we have a security analyst here that you might be an ArcSight engineer or something along those lines. I mean, it's just you can put it to whatever best represents yourself without going overboard.
I'm going a little. We're already 5 minutes long, but we have a break right now, and we had started late. So what I'll probably do, I'm sure that you can ask more questions after, but why don't we do something like departing thoughts per person, whoever's ready to go first.
I think everyone knows what mine is. You can probably get it out. Be authentic.
Be authentic. Okay.
I think communication. I think you want to make sure that you communicate with the recruiters and HR, but also when you have an opportunity to meet with the managers and your potential peers, ask questions, ask tough questions, and to find out really what's going on. What's a day in the life? What do we do? What are you doing here? How did you come up within the system? How does it work out? So take the time and remember, if you have more questions, because this happens every time, as soon as you leave the building, you walk outside, you get a breath of fresh air, you go, oh, I meant to ask this. You have the contact. You have the recruiter's email address. You guys have spoken a number of times. Send a list of questions. Say, hey, I meant to find out this, but I forgot to ask. And in most cases, we'll send it to the team and have them answer it and get that back to you.
So the thing I would say, in addition to networking, when you're actually going on site, this is going to sound really obvious and remedial. Do research, do homework on the company, and more than just understanding like their canned value proposition or their slogan. Because I cannot tell you the number of times I've sat in wrap-up meetings with the company where the people are pretty proud of what the company does, and they starkly observe, like, wow, this guy wasn't even important enough for this person to do a minimal amount of homework on us just to find out a little bit about. They're not expecting to write a paper, but it will absolutely bite you in the rear if you don't really prepare and can't do at least a reasonable job of explaining some part of the company's history. It stands out like a sore thumb.
I mean, I'm not the hiring manager, but my departing advice, kind of touching on the things I like the most from what I heard, is don't game the system. I mean, life is too short to be unhappy, and we tend to get wrapped up in our title, we tend to get wrapped up in our salary. The most important things when you look at the stress and burnout, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, by the way, our friends that are really miserable or really unhappy with decisions, it all came down to culture and fit. So back to say it again, 90% of life is expectation management. I think this is an equal footing negotiation of what you want to get, what they want to get. If it works out, fantastic, you'll probably be happy. If it doesn't, part friends, respect each other, and so on. I mean, our lives are too short to waste time at the wrong profession.
Yeah, don't set yourself up for failure, and don't let your potential employer set you up for failure.
All right, we have enough reasons to be miserable in security. This doesn't need to be one of them. And on that happy note, you now have free time. Thank you for coming. We got